Good morning, everybody. My name is Pharmacist Emeka Mezie, a pharmacist on rotation from the University of Ilorin, Kwara State, Nigeria. And today I'm presenting on a topic, pharmaceutical industry and regulatory affairs. From the terminology pharmaceutical industry, basically we are talking about the different things that happens in a typical pharmaceutical industry. But our focus today is going to be on some key things which I'm going to list out. We're going to talk about the roles of healthcare professionals in the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to be talking about the benefit of students, benefit of healthcare professionals in the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to be talking about the regulatory affairs and how they are regulated. We're going to be talking about response letter, what a response letter is. We're going to be talking about the tools by which FDA communicates safety to consumers. I'm going to be ending with the roles of the Division of Drug Information. So I'll start with the roles of a healthcare professional. Now, healthcare professionals include pharmacists, doctors, nurses. They all work in the pharmaceutical industry at different levels. So what are their roles? Number one, consumer response center specialist. What is a consumer response center specialist? This is the first line that a consumer can get, first line or first person or first point of contact that a consumer that needs information about a particular drug can call or reach to. For example, let's say I have a drug X and I want to know what that drug X is about. What are the indications? What are the side effects? What are the problems associated with this drug? When can I use it? How do I use it? Now, the person you call in the pharmaceutical industry is a consumer response center specialist. So you call him to ask about the information about specific drugs. Now, another role of a healthcare professional is a medical information specialist. What from the word medical information, this is the person that gives us the information about a particular drug, everything we need to know about the drug. He's the one that will source from the information from the literature review, tell us what they've used that drug for and how they use it. Another role is a managed market specialist. This particular specialist, healthcare professional, deals with telling us the value of a particular product, the value, the negative value, the positive value of that particular product. He tells it to the public what you can use that drug for. Now, I'll be moving to the next concept. What are the benefits of students, benefits of healthcare professionals, benefits of graduates in the pharmaceutical industry? Now, as a student, if you go for your CWES or your IT, you can gain knowledge about what goes on in pharmaceutical industry. You gain more knowledge by having some practicals, having some other things. You go from the one word, from one unit to another. You see how things are being done, how they produce things, how they package things. You learn. As a graduate, you're able to, through fellowship, you're able to gain more knowledge. And as a healthcare professional per se, you'll be able to contribute your quota to the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the third thing, how are they regulated? The healthcare professionals in the pharmaceutical industry are regulated by two regulatory bodies, the FDA and the SOP. What is the FDA? The FDA is the Food Drug Administration. This FDA regulates the pharmaceutical industry externally, while the SOP, that is the standard operating practice or procedure, regulates or gives the healthcare professional what to do and how they need to do carry out their activities on a daily basis in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, the third thing I will go to is what a response letter is. What is a response letter? A response letter is basically a written correspondence that is internally reviewed to answer to questions from consumers, from patients, from doctors. What do I mean? For example, if a consumer asks or wants to know about a particular drug or says, okay, what's the side effect of that particular drug, and is asking from Korea and it sends it to a pharmaceutical industry in Nigeria, the only way by which you can respond to that particular request is by writing a response letter. So what do? We get, okay, this is the information they want need about this drug. So we search through the literature review about that particular drug and give a detailed information about the drug and send it to the person asking for that particular information. So the letter by which we use to send is called a response letter. And for every response letter to be called a response letter, it must be evidence based. It means everything you're going to put into a response letter must come from a particular literature review. Now, how do you report adverse effect? Now, although we have drugs and we know that drugs are used to treat different conditions and are regulated by the FDA, but most drugs may have side effects. Now, if you come across a side effect of a particular drug, how are you going to report it? That's what we adverse effect reporting. Now, to report any side effect of any drug, you report it using what we call the FDA 3500A. It's a form that you have to fill. Okay, you're having rash when you take this drug, you're having this when you take this drug. What you do, you call the pharmacist and tell them about the side effect, and they report it in the FDA 3500 form, and they send it to the what? To the FDA for documentation. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the roles of the Division of Drug Information. What do they do in the FDA? Number one, they help to support the FDA mission, which is to protect consumers and to ensure that every drug use betters the health of the consumers. Two, to provide expertise or provide expert information on each drug. So the Division of Drug Information, apart from helping to support the FDA mission, they provide informations on different drugs. Okay, this drug has this indication, this drug has this side effect, this drug needs to be used by this drug gives all the information about specific drug to specific consumers and to the general public. Now, how do FDA communicate safety tools? How do they communicate safety tools? One, they can relate with the trade union. For example, if the FDA wants to communicate safety tools about a particular drug to Nigerian consumers, he can relate to the trade union, trade association. He goes to the market, goes to the bus stops, goes to different areas. Now, relates with them and tells them, okay, this particular drug has a particular side effect. Now, from there, the heads of those particular trade association and trade union were able to communicate their information to their members. So one, by relating and having a relationship with the trade association. Number two way by which they can communicate safety to their consumer is by labeling updates. It means that they will write all the information about a particular drug on the label of that drug. So if a consumer comes across that label, he or she is able to know, okay, this drug is for this use, this is what I will see, this is what I will experience if I use this drug, this is how I will use it. And if I see this particular thing, I will know, okay, this is the adverse effect or side effect of this particular drug. So those are the two major ways by which FDA can communicate safety to consumers. So to wrap up this particular presentation, we're talking about the pharmaceutical industry and the regulatory affairs. So thank you for listening.
Good morning, everyone. I am Aaron Joel Nundu, and I am going to be talking to us all about drug information, education, and training. So, to begin with, I will say drug information is a very key aspect in the pharmacy curriculum. So, the information retrieval, evaluation, and application is a core skill that every set of pharmacists is supposed to have, regardless of their area of practice. So to meet the broader needs of the profession, the practice of drug information has gone beyond the scope of just retrieving, evaluating, and the application of information based at the literary, just at the based at the literary level, to more specialized and to more specific and organizational needs, and also towards a patient-centered care requirements, such as in the establishment of therapeutic policy management and orientation of specialized drugs, and also in the promotion of wellness and good health. So we're going to move to talk to us about drug information in the pharmacy curriculum. Now, drug information skills, like earlier said, are core skills which every set of pharmacists is supposed to have. So the pharmacy curriculum must be designed in such a way that the graduate pharmacists are equipped with sufficient knowledge, skills, abilities, and also aptitudes, so as to provide a patient-centered care approach to the practice. So it is very important that each set of pharmacists have these drug information skills. So concerning the drug information in the didactics curriculum, now the uh, professional program accreditation board makes provisions for some key elements which are supposed to be present in the curriculum of pharmacists as to regards the area of drug information and the application. So some of these key elements includes areas like the like biostatistics, pharmacoeconomics, research design, health informatics, pharmacy law, and litigation affairs, amongst others. So the American College of Clinical Pharmacists and the Drug Information and Research Network also came up with a paper which they published to ensure that the practice of drug information and the practice of drug information training is it constantly adapts to the increasing and changing environment of the healthcare sector. So, talking about shortage of training, talking about the shortage of trained pharmacists in the drug information specialty, we are going to realize that despite the much work that has been done in this area, just about 40% of practicing pharmacists actually went through the required training for acquiring the necessary skills to become experts in drug information, while this other 60% of the practicing pharmacists either got the skills on their practice sites as they or due to their day-to-day practice. And this could be in a way explained by the fact that there is little awareness which is being created at the level of students who want to go into residency into these programs, or also due to the fact that because of the increasing pressure on employers are now like employers are now forced to pick people with pharmacists who don't really have the professional training in these the required professional training in this field, in this specialty, to fill in vacant positions at their level of the organizations. So we can just use this as an example of the many reasons why we still have a shortage of trained pharmacists in this area of drug information. So we talking now about the postgraduate training in drug information. Now, like I said, it cannot be overemphasized or overstressed the importance of scientists in this field. So there are two. The pharmacy residency program is divided into two sections. You have the PG1, which is the postgraduate year one, and the postgraduate year two, and both of these program levels inculcate core skills for drug information acquisitions. So the path for someone to become a specialist in this field is actually to go through the pharmacy residency program at the PG level 1 and top it up with the PG level 2. So in conclusion, I'm going to say all pharmacists, regardless of their area of practice, uh, are supposed to be experts or are supposed to have a good mastery of drug information skills, and this goes through their training from the professional programs like the B farms and the PharmDs, through the residency programs, and also at the level of fellowships. And also pharmacists can continually equip themselves with continually increase their knowledge in drug information through their continuous uh, uh, um, continuous education skills as the practice, and also at their practice sites to meet the ever increasing and changing needs of the health sector. So thank you very much.
Pause.
Good afternoon. My name is Adaniniola, and I'll be presenting on the application of statistical analysis in the biomedical sciences. We'll start with population and sampling. When investigating a particular research question or hypothesis, researchers must first define the population to be studied. A population refers to the set of objects in the universe, while a sample is a fraction of the population that is to be studied. Usually, for example, say the study is to evaluate the effect of a calcium channel blocker on the blood glucose level of type 1 diabetes mellitus patients. In this case, all the type 1 diabetes mellitus patients is are the all of them that treat type 1 diabetes mellitus, they are the population. But then you cannot carry out the research on all the patients. So the small size that is selected, or the fraction that is selected, that is the sample. Then we move to variables and the measurement of data. A variable is a characteristic that is being observed or measured. Now, by data is the measured values assigned to the variable for each member of the population. For example, a variable will be the participant's biological sex, while the data will be either female or male. Now, there are two main types of variables: dependent variable and independent variable. The dependent variable is the response or outcome variable for a study, while the independent variable is the variable that is manipulated. For example, to evaluate the effect of different doses of an oral hypoglycemic medication on fasting blood sugar, then the dependent variable will be the fasting blood sugar of the participant, while the independent variable will be the doses that is changing. So when you are changing the doses, there will be a difference in the fasting blood sugar that is observed. So the fasting blood sugar is the dependent variable, while the doses is the dependent variable. Measures of central tendency. The most common method of central tendency are mean, median, and mode. Mean is the arithmetic average of the variables data. It is calculated by summing a variables data and then dividing it by total number of participants with data for the specific variable. The median is the absolute middle of the data. So that means that exactly half of the data is above the median and exactly half of the data is below the median. The mode is the variable with highest number of frequency. That is the most occurring variable. There can be more than one mode in a particular research or in a particular variable. The mode can have more than one. It can be multiple modes. It can be bimodal, trimodal, or it might be more than that. Measures of variability. Measures of variability is used to indicate the spread of a variable's data. That is how scattered are the data around the mean and the median. The most common measures of variable are the range, the variance, and the standard deviation. The range is the simplest to calculate. It's calculated by dividing the maximum variable. It's calculated by subtracting the maximum variable from the minimum from the maximum. You subtract the smallest from the biggest. That is the range. Then the variance and standard deviation, they are related mathematically. Variance is the average square derivation for all the mean of a particular data, and the variance is used to know how diverse or how scattered are the data around the median and the mean. So variance, the larger the variance, the larger the variability. That means that the larger the variance, the larger the spread across the mean. Then standard deviation and variance are related mathematically, as I've said earlier. So in other words, the larger the standard deviation, so the scattering, the larger the variability in the data. Measure of measure of distribution shape. We have the skewness and the courteous. The skewness represents the asymmetry of distribution of data points, and it can be either be positively skewed or negative skewed. Positive skewness occurs when the median or mode are less than the mean. That means that more of the values are found are positive skewness occurs when the median and the mean are less than the mean. So that means positive skewness occurs when much of the data is found before the mean, and then negative skewness occurs when much of the data is found after the mean. Then quarters indicates the thickness of the distribution of data points, and it can be either be positive quarters, which is known as leptokurtic, or negative quarters known as platykurtic. Graphical representations. There are various forms of graphical representations: histogram, block point, or scatter point. But for the sake of this presentation, I'll be talking about histogram. Histogram presents data as a frequency count over some interval. That is, the x-axis represents the value of data points, while the y-axis represents the number of times the data appears in the variable. Time's up. Okay. So lastly, I'll move to incidence and prevalence. Incidence quantifies the occurrence of an event or outcome over a specific period within a specific population of individuals. The incidence rate is calculated by dividing the number of new events by the population at risk, with the population at risk defined as total number of people who have not experienced the outcome. Prevalence quantifies the number of people who have already experienced the event or outcome at a specific point. Prevalence is calculated by dividing the total number of people experiencing the event by the total number of individuals in the population. The denominator for the prevalence is the people, that is everyone in the population. So the difference between incidence and prevalence is in the denominator. For the incidence, it's the population that is at risk that is the denominator, while for the prevalence is everybody in the population. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Blessing Oziama, a pharmacy student on ward rounds at the University of Ilorin Teaching Hospital, and I'll be talking on drug evaluation monographs. So briefly, I'll just be going through the introduction, the purpose of a drug evaluation monograph, sources of drug monograph, content of the drug monograph, and the importance, as well as the components of a drug monograph. So the introduction is that when the establishment and maintenance of a drug formulary requires that drug or drugs classes be assessed based on efficacy, safety, uniqueness, and cost. So basically, we are using 4 factors here. We need effectiveness, risk, and cost to make therapeutic decisions. Those are the factors that will be used to select the drugs for a formulary, and that is why a drug evaluation monograph has to be built. The drug evaluation monograph serves as a source of unbiased information to healthcare professionals on the drugs. It will talk about how safe the drugs are, their costs, the effectiveness compared to other classes of drugs and also within the same class. So a drug evaluation monograph is basically a structured method to review the major features of a drug product. Then sources of a drug monograph. There are commercially prepared drug monographs that you can get from drug manufacturing companies. Then a hospital or an institution, perhaps maybe a teaching hospital or a university, can decide to prepare its own set of drug monographs based on the information that is available to that institution. So of course, the contents of the drug monograph will then depend on the needs of the institution. A hospital will have, for example, a drug manufacturer will prefer more on the physical characteristics and then perhaps comparison to other classes. Then the hospital will have more information on the use of those drugs in practice. Then we have content of the drug monograph. The content, as I've said before, the content of a drug monograph will depend on the institution that is preparing the drug monograph and what they actually need it for. Some just stop at preparing a drug monograph summary. Then the importance, basically, it's a way of allowing both the patients, the physicians, and the pharmacists to have input on how, because basically the main idea of a drug monograph is to ensure that you have the information that is necessary to create the best possible decision for the patient. So all the physician, the pharmacist, and the patients are going to have an input when a drug evaluation monograph is going to be prepared based on the information that they see, on the information that they obtain in the use of that particular agent. So the parts of the drug monograph, the first page is the summary page. Usually it contains specific introductory information, the chemical structure, the name, the typical brand names, especially in the manufacturers, the ones prepared for drug manufacturers, and then they also put in the drug class. If it is for a drug class, the entire class will be listed, and then the most common agents will also be listed under that in the summary page. Then formulary recommendation. After this, they will have to determine that if it's for a particular drug, is it recommended to be added to the drug formulary or not? Then then third party institutions, perhaps such as insurance, and then perhaps those that are paying, they call them third party payers, such as insurance companies or national health insurance. They are going to have an input when you are creating a drug formulary. For instance, they will prefer that you, of course, select the cheapest that will work with the best for the patient, so as to minimize costs on their own end. Then there's also input and support for non-member expertise, perhaps those that are in charge of supply and logistics, that may not be members of the healthcare team per se, but they are also involved in um, drug supply. Then there are types of formulary recommendations, such as added for uncontrolled use. Then there's also added for monitored use, meaning that whenever the drug is selected by any prescriber, they will actually have to monitor the effect of that drug closely wherever it is used. Then added with restrictions means that there's restriction on who can prescribe and when it can be used, and or maybe they can be used in some words and not in other words. Then conditional, it may be that the drug might be available at certain times times, perhaps based on demand and supply, but it may not be available at other times. Then there are some called not added and not deleted, meaning that they are not actually stocked by the hospital, but you can recommend them. They have to whoever is prescribing such drugs has to actually send the person will actually the prescriber will actually have to write why exactly he or she is prescribing that drug, and whether the patient can wait for the period of time that it will take to supply the drug. Then of course adding with restrictions. Then if the drug is too expensive and it comes with less, it's not as effective, or it is not, the effectiveness is comparable to those that are cheaper than it is, they might decide to just simply delete it from the formulary, since the extra expense is not supported by extra effectiveness or perhaps extra safety. But this is not always the case. Usually the more expensive drugs tend to be more effective, or perhaps they tend to be safer, or they tend to have reduced side effects. So this end up being a gray area, which determines, so it's a gray area. There might not be a right answer at that time. Then the sections of a drug monograph: pharmacological data, usually is shortest, the structure and the mechanism of action, therapeutic indications, the disease that it can be used for and the conditions it can be used for, bioavailability and pharmacokinetics. This is usually common to most drug monographs, irrespective of where they are prepared. Then dosage, administration and supply, and then known adverse effects or toxicities, as well as cost comparison between members of its own class and other drugs that perhaps do the same thing but belong to other classes. Then in conclusion, preparing a drug evaluation monograph may require a great amount of time and effort, using many of the skills discussed to obtain, evaluate and collate and use that information. However, it is essential in providing quality care to the patient. Thank you all.
Hello everyone, my name is Untitled Ilorin. I'm here to present a topic. My topic is project management. Um, um, so the in the healthcare sector, we have physicians, nurses, and pharmacists working together to provide patients with the best and optimal care that can result in the best therapeutic outcome. As we all know, the healthcare sector is becoming more and more complex, and we are moving from a physician-centric model of patient care to a more interdisciplinary method of that involves the pharmacists, the nurses, and the doctors working together in order to provide the patient with the best therapeutic outcome. Thus, in order to do all this, the most healthcare professionals do not apply what is known as the project management framework in carrying out the task. For example, let's look at this case. A surgeon, for example, now wants to do a surgery, but he does not do the he does not go through the patient chart. He doesn't have a pre-surgical session with the surgical team, and he does not prepare the room for surgery. He just goes into the surgery like that. So we know that the success, the we do not know we do not know that the success outcome for that kind of surgery will be low. The chances for the patient to actually have a therapeutic outcome that will be favorable will be very low. Thus, project management framework do not actually guarantee the success of that surgery, but it improves the likelihood of success and improves the chances that the patient will have a therapeutic outcome that will be favorable, and it also improves productivity and outcome. So what are projects? Projects are finite endeavors. That means we know the end and we know the beginning. Although they are progressively elaborate, that means at the beginning we might know a little bit about the project, but as the project progresses, it encompasses more details, and the project actually has more information to offer. Thus, in order to carry out a project, we have to find out whether that project will be viable. That means it aligns with the organization's objective and overall vision, and it has value. That means the project can, when implemented, can add value to the um, healthcare sector. For example, let's take it for example. Let's say the pharmacy unit decides to implement a new compounding system. So in order to find out the value that that kind of compounding system can bring, we have to find out the kind of harm that the current process that the pharmacy unit is using, what kind of harm does it do. So in order to know, let's say for example, the new pharmacy compounding process can save more lives by improving the sterile conditions of the pharmacy. So we now look at the harm that is being done if that sterile compounding process is not being implemented. Thus, in order to create that kind of project, we have to create a business case, which is an argument to show that okay, the value that is being implemented is actually beneficial to the pharmacy unit. Thus, in order to start a project, we have to initiate it first. As we all know, initiating a project, we have something called the project charter. The project charter includes the overall goal, which is also called the guidepost. The guidepost outlines the overall vision of the project, and also we have the goal. The goal is the desired outcome that we want from that project, and also we have a success criteria. The success criteria um, is a quantifiable measure that determines whether when a goal is being accomplished. Also, when initiating a project, we have to know those that will be involved in carrying out that project to ensure a successful completion. Those people that are involved are called stakeholders. The stakeholders are people that the project impacts in one way or the other, or they have an effect, or they have a contribution to make to the project. The stakeholder might be people that they are aware or unaware or actually are actively participating in the project. Thus, we move to the second goal. Sorry, initiating a project, we have to know the project constraints, which are the time, the scope, and the resources. As we all know, time and resources are finite, and they have to be managed effectively for a project to actually be carried out. So also, we have to do an analysis before we start the project, which are the environmental and the external factors that can impact the project. This analysis can be conducted using a PERSU analysis, which is PERSU stands for, the P in PERSU stands for political, economic, social, legal, technological, and environmental. Thus, once we know, also we can conduct a SWOT analysis. That's the second analysis that can be conducted in project management initiation before a project is initiated. SWOT analysis actually helps to capitalize on the strength and minimize the weakness that the project can have. So in order to plan a project, we have to determine the scope. The scope is the boundary of the project, is when this project will start and where it will end. Also, we have to identify the work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure involves identifying the number of resources and the tasks needed in order to complete the number of resources and the resources needed to complete tasks. Once these are done, then we will need to develop a time frame. The time frame is usually developed after completion of assessment and components associated with the project. So, and also after identifying the tasks and the resources needed to accomplish those tasks. So in order to create a timeline, we use something called the Gantt chart. The Gantt chart is a visual progression of progression and overall timeline of a project. So other components in planning the project includes requirement matrix, the risk management plan. The risk management plan involves the risks that can occur in carrying out a project. Also, we have the communication management plan. In the communication management plan, the team that is in, rather the stakeholders that are involved in the project will need to be in sync. That means they need to know or to be on the same front when the project is being initiated. They need to be on the same, they need to understand and they need to be able to communicate well the tasks to be carried out and the resources needed in order to in order to avoid errors. So also in the third part of project management, we have execution. In order to execute a project, we need to follow a predetermined or a predefined strategy. Following a predefined strategy actually has an advantage because when you know the method that you're going to use to carry out a project, it actually helps in fast tracking a project. That means you already know the plan that you want to follow, the strategy that you want to carry out, and also fast track the project. So we have the next step, which involves monitoring and controlling. To monitor a project, you need to measure the project quality, which is how good the end result will be. So in order to do this, we do something called the quality assurance and the quality control. The quality control to measure quality of a project. In the quality assurance, it ensures the value of the final product, while the quality control is to ensure that there are no deficiencies in the final product. So once you have done all this, I believe you can close your project. And in order to close our project, we need to determine whether the predetermined requirement that we set at the beginning of the project are actually being met. So that includes the success criteria, which when we see that, for example, let's say the project is to regain a lost sector in the pharmaceutical marketing in pharmacy. So a project can be said to be completed if we can get at least 30% of that market, and if we can regain 30% of that market. So I think that will be the end.
Don't touch anything.
Good, good afternoon. My name is Kunle Oluwakolade. I'm here to present a topic on investigational drugs. According to Cancer.org, an investigational drug is any substance that has been tested in the laboratory and has been approved by the FDA for testing in people. It is also known as an experimental drug or investigational new drug. And according to the FDA, there's about $2.6 billion that is used to bring a new drug into the market, and since 1940, 10,000 new drug applications has been submitted. And I'm going to talk about the history of drug development using the United States as a case study. For 100 years after their independence, there was no formal process for approving of drugs, and this led to a number of tragedies. The first was in 1848 during the Mexican War, where substandard drugs were imported into the country, which led to the passing of the import drug law, which banned substandard drugs from being imported into the country. Following that, 1906, the Pure Food Drug Act was passed, and another tragedy struck in 1937, where sulfonamide was packaged with diethylene glycol, which was an antiphysant, which led to the death of 107 people. This led to the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act, from which the FDA was established, and this law required that they must submit a new drug application to the FDA, demonstrating the safety and efficacy of drugs before marketing. And during 1960s, another tragedy struck during the thalidomide incident, when in Europe, a number of women gave birth to defective children. Although it did not happen in the US further strengthened their drug laws to prevent such incidents from happening. I'm going to talk about the functions of FDA in drug approval process. The FDA is the Food and Drug Agency, which is responsible for determining which drugs, biological, and medical devices are safe and efficacious, and therefore can be marketed for use in the United States. The FDA is also responsible for protection of human subjects through the Investigational Review Board, which follows the Nuremberg Code. And this code states that the voluntary consent of human subjects is absolutely essential, and also that the subjects must know the risks and benefits of the studies, and they must be free from coercion and be of sound mind before volunteering. The FDA is also responsible for the drug approval process, and before you can go to phase clinical trials, you have to submit an investigational new drug application. And this application contains a number of things, and because of time constraints, I will list them. The cover sheet, which is the form 1571, names the sponsor, and that the sponsor must agree to follow appropriate regulations. And then the table of contents, the introductory statements, the general investigational plan, which details the rationale, the indication for using the study design, the investigations brochure, the clinical protocol, which contains the study patient selection, how to determine the dose, clinical procedure, etc. The chemical manufacturing and control data, which lists the biological, physical, and chemical characteristics of the drugs that is to be investigated, and any other additional information that may be required to be put in the investigational new drug application. And after you submit this to the FDA, only then can you proceed to clinical trials. And the clinical trials exist in three phases. The phase 1, which is the first use of the agent in humans, and it is a small study containing nothing more than 20 to 80 patients who have no pre-existing conditions. And in cases where they cannot do that, for example in oncology patients, you can use it in terminally ill patients. and you are trying to demonstrate the safety and efficacy of the drug. The phase 2 is when you actually use the drug in patients with the disease condition you are trying to test. Now, this study is larger than the phase 1, and the patient size, sample size is from 100 to 200, and the preliminary results and the marketability of the drug can be predicted from phase 2 studies. Now, the phase 3 is the multicenter trial, which has a maximum of 3,000 sample size, and it is used to test the condition in multi-variable situation. And now the FDA is promoting the use of pharmacogenomics in the phase 3 trials to determine the patients who are fast and slow metabolizers of a particular drug, so they can tailor the dose to those patients. Now, after the phase 3 of the clinical trials, you submit the all the information to the FDA, and they will set up a review board, and this review board is determined based on the classification of the drug, the indication of the drug. And there are two there's the priority review board and there's the standard. The priority is for drugs that don't have any correct treatment plan or indication. Now, lastly, I'll talk about the Orphan Drug Act. The Orphan Drug Act is an initiative by the FDA for drugs that used in treating disease for less than 20 that affects less than 200,000 people worldwide. Now, the FDA does not give them an advantage, but it just gives them, because the drug is used in a limited number of people, it doesn't have much profitability. So the FDA gives them a grant, which is about $14 million yearly, and it doesn't hasten the process. It just provides them a level ground. Thank you.
My name is Sherif Alimi, and I'll be talking about drug shortages and counterfeit drugs. Now, what is drug shortage? There are different definitions of drug shortage, but generally, drug shortage is a situation, a public health situation that affects all parts of the medication supply chain, both the clinicians and the patients. The FDA, there are two major definitions of drug shortage. There's a definition from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and definition from the American Society of Health System Pharmacists, ASHP. Now, the FDA definition of drug shortage is a situation in which the total supply of interchangeable versions, of all interchangeable versions of an FDA regulated drug is a situation in which the total supply of all interchangeable versions of an FDA regulated drug is less than the projected demand at the patient level. The ASHP defines it as a situation as a supply chain situation that affects how the pharmacy compounds, prepares, and dispenses a drug, such that an alternative medication must be administered. Now, what are the causes of drug shortages? Largely, the causes of drug shortages are unknown, but it is believed that from the reports that have been gotten by the FDA that manufacturing issues are the major reason why drug shortages happen. Now, in manufacturing, companies have to adhere to a protocol known as CGMP, Current Good Manufacturing Practices. Sometimes this doesn't happen. There are quality deviations, and there are quality assurance and quality control deviations from the stated regulations. So drug release into the market have to be delayed, and this causes supply chain disruptions. And also, some pharmacies only use just-in-time inventory to prevent taking on excess inventory in their pharmacies. So when a supply chain delay happens, the pharmacy usually does not have enough drug to make up for that delay. Now, now this affects the clinicians and also the patients. Now, how do you fix drug shortages? Now, usually the best way to fix a drug shortage is before it happens. So prevention in this case is the better option to go for. The FDA has something called the inspection reports and warning letters that they issue out to pharmacists and hospitals to tell them about the manufacturers that they flagged as having manufacturing concerns as regards their CGMP and quality and quality assurance issues. So this is to recommend to the pharmacists and the hospitals that certain manufacturers should not be consulted for certain medications. Now, also, what is the impact of another fix that exists for a drug shortage is allowing minor quality issues to pass so that a drug shortage can be prevented. For example, sodium phosphate can be passed by the FDA even though it has particles inside the drug with the with the sale of filters and their healthcare provider letters to warn the healthcare provider of the safety issue. Now, what is the impact of drug shortage? The major impact of drug shortage is delay in patient care, and ultimately this can lead to adverse patient outcomes such as death or even exacerbation of some disease conditions. Now, what are counterfeit drugs? Counterfeit drugs, the WHO, World Health Organization, notes that counterfeit drugs affect every region of the world. It defines counterfeit drugs as substandard, spurious, falsely labeled, falsified, and counterfeit products. These medications may not contain the right amount of active pharmaceutical ingredients, or they may not even contain the correct active ingredient at all. Products sometimes contain fillers like chalk, like and even some toxic chemicals. All types of medicines are falsified, including expensive medications as well as the generic ones. The most commonly reported counterfeit medications worldwide are antimicrobials. Most counterfeit medications found in the United States are purchased online or from unlicensed or foreign suppliers. In 2015, the FDA found a counterfeit version of Botox that was sold by an unlicensed foreign supplier. The FDA also found counterfeit Cialis in 2015 that had been purchased by a single consumer from an internet pharmacy. The FDA recommends patients or healthcare providers to purchase medications only from state licensed pharmacies or internet pharmacies with verified internet pharmacy practice sites. Verified internet pharmacy practice sites accreditation program. The WHO provides recommendations to help identify counterfeit medicines, such as ensuring that the package is in good condition and it is unbroken, reviewing security seals, checking that the batch numbers and expiration dates match, and also checking that these numbers match between the internal and external packages of the medication. Healthcare providers can report potential counterfeit medications to FDA via MedWatch. And there are also other ways of tracking counterfeit medications to prevent the substitution of counterfeit products that have been investigated, such as the use of RFID tags, radio frequency identification tags. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I go by Balogun Olenka Kodri, and I'll be talking about policy, procedure, guidelines, and protocols in the healthcare system. So, the outline for my presentation will be to know the definition of all these terms that I've stated, then some problems that are associated with developing um, practice um, practice documents. Then also we'll be talking about regulatory considerations, and then factors influencing practice document development. Then the document development design itself, and then the systemic methods for practice document development and maintenance. First, what is um, policy? Policy is defined as set of rules and laws that are set to or that are set or designed or given to healthcare professionals in such a way to provide guidance for them in their practices. Then guidelines are known as standards that are provided by some regulatory bodies so as to give safety and effective healthcare practices also. Then protocols are like a derivation from the guidelines, whereby it is it is a kind of standard that is given to some certain bodies in a geographical location. For example, you have the guidelines for the guideline for treating for antibiotic treatment in um, diabetic foot infection doesn't have cefixime in the list of cephalosporin, but in UITH for their protocol you have cefixime because it has proven to be effective in its usage. Then lastly is the procedure. Procedure are um, group of there are steps that are laid for healthcare professionals to follow. They are just and they are usually related to protocols and guidelines. They're just the steps that you have to follow in order to uphold the protocol and guidelines as well as policies. So then the problems associated with all these documents, which are collectively known as practice documents, is that many clinicians are not usually familiar with some specific documents, that is practice documents that are out there, and they are usually associated with familiar with the general application of all these documents instead of some specific ones that are created. And another problem is that some clinicians and healthcare providers are not involved in developing practice documents. Another thing is that the the skill sets are needed to be developed or instilled in healthcare professionals while they are still in school. So skill sets should be taught early with specific recommendation from the Center of Advancement of Pharmacy Education. Then moving to the next in line, that is the regulatory consideration. Consideration, that is, these are the regulatory bodies that help to coin this practice document, and they are actually there are two types. That is, people involved in development of the practice documents, and these are actually healthcare providers and some other professionals like legal practitioners too, which help to ensure that the compliance and safety of healthcare practice is upheld. Then the second group are the ones that help to accredit these coined practice documents. So they help to form a kind of a cycle which help to provide more effectiveness of this of the compliance of these practice documents. Then moving to the next line, that is the factors influencing practice document development is actually two. That is the time frame involved in reviewing and creating some of these practice documents. Then secondly is the extent of the review process, that is due to the level of broadness or scope of the document. Another the next in my outline is to talk about um the practice document designs. Practice document design are usually in two approach, that is the unified approach and then the separated approach. Unified approach is the one whereby you have all these practice documents. For example, you have um policies and procedures for a particular topic or concern, which is actually carried out by the unified approach, while the separated approach usually have the development and design single-handedly designed. So the next that I'm going to talk about is the systemic approach for practice. The systemic approach for practice, when we have to identify the need practice documents are created. Then the second is to gather relevant data that are going to be important for the development of this practice document. Then the next is to follow best practice recommendation, then followed by the drafting of the document in whatever way, whether it is in manual or in software format. Then dissemination of review and comments in order to see whether there will be adjustments, and then once there is positive review and comment, then there is receiving or of approval. Then the next is to publish and educate the public and everyone about the developed practice document. Then the next is to what is to monitor compliance so as to um, promote the effective usage and practice of the document. So thank you very much.
Yes.